Several years later,
Yeah.
I saw him on the news.
Yeah.
And when he was leaving work in his uniform,
Mm-hmm.
with his warrant card, he was using that uniform and that warrant card to get little girls to get into his car.
What?
And he was actually convicted of, I think it was something like 5 separate rapes on colleagues and, as I say, girls as young as 12 that were on their way home from school.
My name is Nick Nagaka and you are locked into Culture TV. For the culture, by the culture. Let's go.
Kerry, thank you so much for coming down today.
Thank you for having me.
So, straight into this, what is a forensic psychologist?
Oh, it's so difficult because it's such a varied role. But if I want to put it simply, it's somebody who answers questions about the minds of people who have come into contact with criminal justice services, usually because they're considered a danger to themselves or other people. So I use psychological models and psychological theories to try and make sense out of behaviour that is difficult sometimes to make sense of.
And would you say, in your line of work, do you often work on behalf of the defence or the prosecution, or is it a bit of both?
Right. So in my time as a forensic psychologist, I've worked in prisons.
Yeah.
I've worked in secure hospitals, and I've worked as an expert witness, which is what you're talking about.
Yes,
So I've worked in courts, and I've been sometimes for the defence, sometimes for the prosecution, and my opinion is always the same, no matter who employs me.
Right.
But hand on heart, I can't say that's true for every psychologist.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. There's lots of Renton opinion out there.
Really?
Yeah, nobody ever says it, but it's definitely the case.
That sets us up for quite a corrupt system from the start then, doesn't it?
It's a system that isn't always the best.
So one thing we were talking about off camera was, because a lot of people, because obviously the reputation that you've built, the work that you've done, and the high profile serial killers that you've worked with, everyone jumps straight into a conversation with you and wants to know about the big names and this, that and the other. But what we were talking about off camera is that actually what is one of the most interesting things about that is, never mind the big serial killers, is how do we even get to that point as a society? What are the building blocks that we're living in as a community and as a culture that are setting us up to have a society full of psychopaths?
I don't know that we've got a society full of psychopaths.
Yeah, you know what I mean.
I think we've got a government that's pretty high on psychopathic traits. Yeah, but
can you tell by looking at people?
No, if I could do that, I'd be psychic, wouldn't I, rather than a psychologist?
But can you not tell by looking at people, but can you tell by seeing someone's behaviour, how they're conversing, body language, etc., whether they have particular traits that you would associate with someone as a psychopath? Or...
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, psychopathy, it's a psychological construct. It's not a thing that you can touch.
Yeah.
And there are different definitions of what a psychopath is.
Right.
But for us, in the forensic world, we're looking for criminal psychopaths.
Yeah.
So we use something called the Psychopathy Checklist.
Yeah.
And it's a list of 20 characteristics or behaviours, if you like. And you get a score of 0 to 2 on each one of those 20 characteristics.
Yeah.
And then if you score over 30 overall, then we will say you are a card-carrying criminal psychopath. And what I find interesting is that I score 3, by the way, on a psychopathy checklist.
Right.
Yeah.
Just putting that out there for clarification.
Not quite Mary Poppins, but then, not really in the big leagues either. But it's very, very skewed, because a lot of the things that we look for are early criminal behaviour, you know, so juvenile delinquency, also, all kinds of rule-breaking behaviour, but certainly rule-breaking behaviour related to the law, so breaking your parole, skipping bail, that kind of thing. Yeah. So a lot of the items are skewed.
Anti-authoritarianism.
Yeah, that kind of thing. So you've got to be a criminal in order to score highly on a psychopathy checklist. So people say, well, all psychopaths are criminals.
Yeah.
But it's circular, isn't it? You're a psychopath because you are a criminal. You're criminal because you're a psychopath.
Yeah.
So it all gets a bit confusing. But what I find interesting is the personality characteristics of a psychopath. So being very manipulative, being aggressive, having a superficial charm, these kind of things.
And
We
is it
see
totally
that
fake?
a lot with people that aren't criminals.
Yeah.
So people
so
in
like
media,
a psychopath, when they have like that superficial charm, and is it all calculated? Everything that they say and do?
Do you know, I was talking about this actually with a guy called Dr. Mark Freeman, and he helped develop the character of Villanelle in Killing Eve.
Yeah.
And you know the Eskimos have got 17 different words for snow.
Yeah.
I think that we could have 17 different words for psychopaths, because people think that they're all the same.
Yeah.
And actually they're very, very different.
Right.
So you might have the archetypal psychopath who doesn't really experience stress.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they all, you know, like the Hannibal Lecter thing.
Yeah.
Ate a tongue and the pulse didn't rise above whatever. Yeah, and then I meet psychopaths, if you want to call them that, because I'm not into labels, you see, who are absolutely massive anxiety. So everybody's different because everybody's a human being.
Yeah.
So I think that these labels aren't necessarily helpful. But I think if you want the core characteristic of somebody that we would call a psychopath, it's somebody who just doesn't experience emotions in the same way as others. Yeah.
Right.
And empathy can be a problem. And what it is not, you see, empathy is two separate things. Mm-hmm. So there's cognitive empathy or intellectual empathy, and that's knowing why a person feels a certain way. Yeah. Yeah. So I know that if I slap you around the head, you're probably not going to be very happy with that, and you might be a bit sad. Yeah. And then there's emotional or affective empathy. Yeah. Yeah. And that is feeling what another person feels. Yeah. So if you got very sad and upset, I might feel something for you. Yeah. And it's that emotional empathy that's lacking in somebody that we label a psychopath.
Yeah. Because they can hurt someone and not feel bad for them in that moment of pain or distress.
And when you think about it, we often talk about sadists and say, well, they've got no empathy at all for their victim, but they've got to have a certain level of empathy, because if I'm a sadist, I enjoy watching people get distressed. Well, so I need to be able to recognize that
almost
person's
like a form
in
of
distress.
self-harm, I suppose.
How do you mean?
So, for example, I mean, from a mental sort of mind state, is that if you enjoy hurting someone, there is an enjoyment in that pain. And in the same way that someone enjoys the feeling of self-harm, feeling pain within themselves, would it not come from the same place cognitively? Do you understand what I mean?
Well, self-harm is a really complex thing, and it serves lots of different functions, but that person would actually feel that pain, wouldn't they? So a psychopath, a sadist, would understand that somebody's in distress and that they are feeling pain. They know that, but they're not going to feel it, so they're not going to have an emotional response to that. Yeah. Because most of us, you know, for example, if we see an animal in pain, we feel bad, don't we? And we want to do something. We want to do something to help. Yeah. Rather than somebody who is truly a sadist. Yeah. Would just enjoy recognizing the distress. Yeah. So it's that difference between knowing something and feeling something. And so it's interesting that often people who are on the autistic spectrum are wrongly called psychopaths. Yeah. And in actual fact, people who are on the autistic spectrum tend to often feel distressed when they see other people in distress. Yeah. They just don't understand where that distress is coming from.
Or why they're feeling that way.
Yeah. So, but it's the opposite way round with psychopaths. It's the knowing, but not the feeling.
What got you into this field? Was this something that you always wanted to do?
Do you know, as a child, I did enjoy the macabre.
Right.
I did. I used to watch, this may be way, way before your time, but Tales of the Unexpected. It was based on Roald Dahl's Tales. Okay. Yeah, and there was a story called The Landlady, which I really enjoyed as a child. Yeah. And basically, it's about this elderly woman who runs a B&B. Yeah. And all of the young men that go to stay at her B&B just go missing.
Right.
Yeah, and she's got a thing for taxidermy.
Right.
So actually, they never leave the B&B. So it's like a really dark, macabre tale, and I
Yeah.
used to enjoy that.
Yeah.
But I was terrified of monsters. So
Right.
Doctor Who,
Yeah.
I'd be behind the sofa.
Yeah. When
The
the
monst-
Daleks come.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the Monster of the Black Lagoon
Yeah.
sent me. Yeah, I couldn't sleep for
Yeah.
weeks. But I was always interested in psychological complexities
Yeah.
of people and weirdnesses, if
Yeah.
you like. But I didn't plan to go into forensic psychology. I planned to go into advertising.
Right.
So when I was at university, I took psychology
Yeah.
because I was advised that this would be good
For advertising. Yeah.
for advertising.
Yeah.
But I had to choose other subjects.
Yeah.
And all the best looking boys
Yeah.
were in the law classes.
Yeah.
And there was one particular boy called
Yeah.
Stephen P. English.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I signed up purely because I wanted to crack on to him. And actually, I never got up the courage to speak to him, but I got really interested in the law.
Right.
So if you want to marry law with psychology, then forensic psychology is the way forward.
Yeah. And so we were discussing like off camera that the criminal justice system, from your experience, isn't fit for purpose.
No. And
How have you come to that conclusion?
I've come to that conclusion over 25 years, really,
Right.
of working in that system and seeing just how little has changed. So I went into my first ever job was at Wakefield Maximum Security Prison. And I was actually an assistant psychologist, a voluntary assistant psychologist. And
What
this
was your first day like there? Do you remember how you felt?
I don't remember the first day so much. What I remember was beforehand, I'd gone to look around Strangeways.
Yeah.
It was called Strangeways at that time.
Yeah.
It's HMP Manchester now.
Is it? I thought it was still strange.
Well, I think in everybody's mind it's
Yeah,
still
yeah.
Strangeways, isn't
Yeah.
it? But after the riots, they
Yeah.
decided to rebrand it and change
Rebrand
it.
it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, give it a bit of a facelift in the public mind.
Yeah.
And I was shown around one of the landings by a prison officer.
Yeah.
And as I walked across the landing,
Yeah.
so I'm just looking at all of these, magnolia cells and all
Yeah.
of these guys in the grey tracksuits. And the whole place erupted into the sound of meows, basically. Right, you get it.
Yeah.
Most people look at me really blankly.
Yeah.
I didn't get it
Yeah.
because I was, 20
Yeah,
at that
yeah.
point. So I remember turning to the prison officer
Yeah.
and saying, why are they making cat noises at me?
Yeah.
And he just rolled his eyes as if to say, oh my God, this girl.
She hasn't got a clue.
Yeah, she's not
Haven't
got a
got a clue
clue.
what she's in
Yeah,
for, yeah.
exactly. And it's going to be a baptism of fire. And it was a baptism of fire. I had a
Really?
tough time at Wakefield Prison. And it wasn't anything to do with the inmates.
What was it more to do with? The
It was to do with the prison
guards and the
officers.
system, yeah.
Yeah, the prison
Why?
officers.
What were they like?
Well, let's put it this way. So within probably a few hours of me having arrived there, they were already running a book on who was going to sleep with me.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. And I think one of the first names in the hat, and certainly the first prison officer to ask me out on a date, was a guy called John Hall.
Right.
And he was the senior officer on C Wing.
Right.
So...
Hearing this, John.
Let me tell you what happened to John.
Yeah.
Let me tell you what happened to John.
You listening, John?
He probably isn't, because
Go on.
several years later,
Yeah.
I saw him on the news.
Yeah.
And when he was leaving work in his uniform,
Mm-hmm.
with his warrant card, he was using that uniform and that warrant card to get little girls to get into his car.
What?
And he was actually convicted of, I think it was something like 5 separate rapes on colleagues and, as I say, girls as young as 12 that were on their way home from school.
My God.
So
That's disgusting.
and it taught me a real valuable lesson. You see, when I got to Wakefield, there was a certain message that was drummed into me.
So really, you had a worse experience from the people trying to rehabilitate the criminals, when really that doesn't make sense, does it?
Yeah, and actually, when you think about it, Wakefield Prison, it's known in the press as Monster Mansion because it's got a high number of sex offenders.
Yeah.
And
Sex offender looking after him.
Yes, and the culture was so misogynistic You know, I had my shoes taken away from me from a prison officer within the first few weeks because he said, "Oh, your high heels, they're clicking on the floor of the landing, and that's going to make it's going to make the inmates have a sexual frenzy, and you're going to get raped. She's going to get raped today, lads. How does that make you feel? You're going to get raped."
What?
So I know this is it. So me being a young woman, a very
How old are you,
naive
20
woman,
years old?
I was 21 at that point.
And then you've got big middle-aged men saying that to you in
Yeah,
the prison.
yeah, really.
That's
So
disgusting.
how do you rehabilitate sex offenders when that is the predominant culture? Now, I'm not saying that every prison officer was like
No,
that.
but still, like that's the peak of predatory, just to be saying that anyway.
There was a lot going on at Wakefield Prison, and I really hope that the culture has changed. I really do.
Yeah.
But the fact that John Hall, now serving a life sentence,
Yeah.
when I got to Wakefield Prison, I was told, listen, it's them and us. You have to remember that at all times.
Yeah.
It's us versus them. So we've got the inmates, they're the bad guys. Then we've got the prison officers, the ones in uniform, they're the good guys. Yeah, them and us. And what I learned is there is no them and us.
Mm-hmm.
It's just us. And I think that this is what people have to wrap their heads around. We think about people who break the law, particularly obviously sex offenders or violent offenders, as monsters, psychopaths, people who are very, very different to us.
Yeah.
And they're not. They're people that live in our communities, work with us maybe, are our
people
colleagues.
who go to jail, I mean, the amount of people that go to jail, they can't all be psychopaths. I mean, I know I know a lot of people who've been to jail.
About
some good
15%.
friends.
Yeah, 15% of the prison population will get a diagnosis of psychopath, rightly or wrongly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that's too high. I mean, I don't know. I don't know the data, but just based off people in my not necessarily immediate circle of friends, but people within my sort of associate affiliated group of say 50, 100 people who are friends of friends and whatnot. Like, that seem like a crazy figure for a psychopath.
The majority
people who've made mistakes, got caught and gone to jail, done a year, 6 months, whatever, petty crimes or whatever. Would they fall into that bracket of psychopath?
No. I mean, as I say, to be a psychopath, you've got to have committed quite a number of crimes, usually violent crimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even for them to be doing the psychopathy test on you, then there's concerns about you. But the majority of people go to prison for actually quite short prison sentences.
Yeah.
So the majority will go in for 6 months or less than a year.
Yeah.
And also, they will then go back in prison for a short sentence, So prison does a really bad job of rehabilitating.
It's making them worse.
Yeah, and one of the arguments is, if you've committed a relatively minor crime, should you go into prison for 6 months at a stint when that's going to disrupt your life? It's going to maybe halt any employment that you've got or stop you from getting employment on the way out.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to be looking at other options, but people don't like that because it's seen as a soft approach, and we like to be tough on crime, don't we, in Britain?
Well, don't you think it's weird that we are, as a society, we focus on psychopathy testing, as you refer to it, on people who would be called criminals, people who might have committed small crimes to large crimes, whatever, but people who broke the law would then be traditionally psychopathy tested first. But then you've got people ruling this country, sending people to war, invading countries, like controlling the finances, getting voted into power. Is there not a psychopathy test for these people first?
This is it. This is what I would really, really like to see.
Surely that's where the attention should be going, to the people who are pulling the strings that have the ripple effect all the way down to the people who are the most disadvantaged in society, who were then breaking so-called laws.
Well, the thing is that, as I say, a psychopathy checklist is meant for use in the criminal population.
Yeah.
But if you think about psychopaths, they are callous.
Yeah.
So they don't care a great deal about other people.
Boris Johnson's definitely got tendencies.
Well, psychopath checklist would also encompass lying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what, a 30 would get you over the line to be a psychopath.
Yeah, but that, as I say, that's
He's at least a 25.
Well, no, you see, he wouldn't score highly because he's not got this criminal past. This is why the psychopathy. This is how we define. It's how we define criminality. But if you just look at personality characteristics of psychopaths rather than criminal behavior, around 20% of people who are in real high-level business, so CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, have got markedly psychopathic characteristics. So it's very prevalent, and actually it's a good thing to have psychopathic characteristics if you're a businessman, because you've got to make decisions that are based on finances, not based on emotions. But also people who are high up in the military tend to have some psychopathic characteristics.
Well, I suppose you'd have to if you're going to send, like, say 1,000 people into a particular battle, knowing the odds of all 1,000 coming back, you're sending maybe 100 people to their death.
Well, exactly. And also, if you've got to make a swift decision about whether you shoot somebody or not, then it helps if you've got psychopathic tendencies, because some psychopaths, they as I say, they're not troubled by emotions so much, because that part of their brain actually is a little bit smaller. So they think, they think more logically and rationally, but without that emotional and moral compass. So that's really helpful if you are in the military. So I think that probably the most dangerous psychopaths, so the ones that are responsible for the most number of deaths, are not serial killers, but are people in government who are willing to make decisions about, right, we're going to cut that extra £20 to universal credit. And, they don't think about actually the impact that's going to have on somebody. The amount of people that take their own lives because they're struggling.
Here's one for you. So, for example, World War II, Germany, you've got a society of people who... you can't say all Germans at that time because we don't know all Germans, but a lot of people joined that Nazi party, and a lot of people who weren't necessarily military minded or a soldier beforehand signed up to join that fascist party. They signed up to believing that Jewish people and whichever other people were bracketed within that deserved at best second-class citizenship and at worst death. How did Hitler or the people at the top of that manage to get so many normal civilians to do so much evil?
I know, and it goes to show, doesn't it? So people say, oh, you've got to be born evil to do these terrible things, but this is we're showing the power of the culture and the society that we're in. And actually that takes us into the psychology of hate. So basically we as humans like to put people in certain boxes and categories, don't we? It's the them and us thing again. So there are people who are like us, and then there are others. And Hitler and people like Hitler was able to persuade through a process of propaganda, millions of people, that the Jews were so incredibly other to us that they were actually not even human. And when you start viewing people as not even human, that's when what you would call normal people become capable of really terrible things. When you think about it, you've probably got more empathy for people that you see as similar to yourself, that have got a similar background to yourself. And maybe you've got less empathy for people that you don't know what they've been through. This is why people have got so much less empathy for immigrants. Because we don't know, do we? We talk about immigrants like this one big mass group. And look at the language.
Immigration is different because I'm the son of an immigrant. So for me,
so for you, it's different.
It's different, But I think I can look at. I mean, this feels weird saying this, but I do. When you say that, if I be honest with myself, like if I be brutally honest, can I be less empathetic to someone who I feel is from a completely different world and walk of life to me? Yeah. I can.
Yeah.
Because I don't understand them.
Exactly. And
But
so,
I don't see them as not human.
Exactly. So your empathy is lowered for them, and that's actually really normal.
Yeah.
It's really normal. And that's why charities, if they want you to give money to a charity,
Yeah.
they don't say, please give money to this group. They will tell you about a particular individual.
Yeah.
They'll say, here's Kanye, and he has to go and collect water and walk for miles, all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But this is it. When you look at the language that
Yeah.
certain people use to describe immigrants, they've been described as cockroaches.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really dehumanizing, isn't it? And that is really dangerous because it's that kind of dehumanization.
Well, it's how they got Brexit through, isn't it?
Well, we're getting very political here, aren't we? But yeah.
I always do, me.
Yeah, it's getting very political here. But I mean, do you know what? I do a program called Faking It, which is about the psychology of lie detection.
Yeah.
And we did do a Faking It episode on Donald Trump.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, but...
Tell me about that then.
Yeah. But I would love to do a Faking It episode on British politicians.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really, really would.
What was the result of the Donald Trump one?
Well, I mean, what can I say? We know that Donald Trump lies, and actually for legal reasons, we had to actually take examples of
when he's lied.
When he lies, so provable lies.
Yeah.
And
so you can't get sued, basically.
Yeah, exactly. We actually had to have a solicitor on standby in the studio.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, and so we were looking at his background really, and from my point of view, what was fascinating was his whole childhood, where he had this this background of too much materially, but not enough emotionally.
Yeah.
And his journey into being, incredibly narcissistic, and also his journey into never being able to admit any kind of weakness or any kind of flaw.
Yeah.
So that was interesting for me. But we looked at the body language because that's what the program is all about.
Yeah.
And he was really difficult to analyze because he believes his own lies.
Wow.
And if somebody believes their own lies, is it a lie at all?
That's why he's so convincing. That's why he got 70-odd million votes.
Yeah, he believes his own bullshit. But you can't. There are certain things, like he's got a kind of squirm that he does when he's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So the Donald Trump squirm.
Yeah.
But it's amazing when you look at the amount of people that have bought into Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not a logical group of animals, are we?
You know what? I watched this film on a few weeks ago on All 4 called Longford, and it was about Lord Longford's relationship with Myra Hindley, and I always thought, why is this guy supporting this evil woman? And watching that film, I mean, I still thought, why is this guy supporting that evil woman? But it kind of gave me a bit more insight into, because she'd completely brainwashed him and manipulated him into thinking that she was this reformed character, and she got bullied into it by Ian Brady. And it was quite interesting to see that the way he must have been sucked in is that she would have appeared as if she believed it herself to get someone like that. He must be pretty well seasoned as a... Well,
I think that Myra Hindley believed whatever was in her best interests, really, at any particular time. I had the opportunity, if you want to call it that, to analyse some letters that had passed between her and Ian Brady, and also from her to a friend and from Ian Brady to the same friend. So, but over a period of absolutely years. And actually, most of the time where women are concerned, they will break the law in collaboration or in conjunction with a male, and often that male is coercing them in some way, shape or form, but obviously that's not always the case. But when you look at the correspondence between Brady and Hindley, for 7 years, the first 7 years of when they were in prison, they were in very, very close contact. They were both taking German courses in prison, and they were writing about this, but they were also exchanging sadistic sexual fantasies for 7 years, all in coded letters.
What?
Yes. So this isn't a woman that, when she found herself in prison, went, you know what, I've been involved in something terrible because I was completely under the thumb of this terrible, terrible man. This is a woman who was really very actively involved.
Right.
And at different times, she's told different stories. I mean, she's said to some people that it was her that killed Pauline Reed. So I believe that she was far more actively involved than, than a lot of people want to care to believe of a woman.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because I think as a society, we always look to women as the maternal, loving character.
Yeah,
and
the nurturing one.
Yeah, it's like a natural thing to do. But when to see a woman hurt children, it just...
Yeah, it seems to go against nature, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think that's why she was probably more vilified than Ian Brady.
Well, he just came across. I mean, not that I know. I'm not an expert on it by any stretch, but from what research and reading up on it I have done, it would appear that he was just completely nuts.
That's one way of putting it.
But she seemed more sane and calculated. Well,
she didn't go on to develop, the same kind of mental distress as he did. So, and he was very, very immersed in reading of, Nazi books and also the works of the Marquis de Sade.
Right.
And actually, he believed, and you can call this madness or you can call this just a bizarre quirk of his personality, but he believed that the only way really to have freedom is to basically declare yourself above any rules and laws of the land.
Right.
And he felt that in killing people,
it gave him freedom.
It gave him freedom, and it allowed him to feel superior because he wasn't what's the best way to put it? He wasn't playing to the same rules as everybody else who he viewed as really quite inferior to him.
Wow.
He felt that he was more intellectually superior to the majority of people, and this was his way of demonstrating it. And he wanted to commit the perfect murders. He never thought that he was going to get caught.
Well, they got caught 2 years later, didn't they? Not even that, a year later.
Yeah.
And so who do you think was leading that relationship?
I think that it's a really difficult one. It's a really difficult one.
If you had to bet, where would you place it?
Well, think about relationships. I don't know whether you're in a relationship, but I know that relationships I've had, sometimes I'm leading the relationship. Sometimes it's the other person.
It's a back and forth.
Yeah.
The healthy ones are a back and forth.
Yeah. And I think, exactly that. And I think that to start with, Myra Hindley was absolutely, she was obsessed with Ian Brady.
Yeah.
And she saw him as somebody who was really very fascinating and exotic. He was so different to everybody else.
Probably quite intelligent as well.
Well, I think she was more intelligent than him. But, they would discuss poetry together. They would discuss books together.
Yeah.
And for Myra Hindley, coming from this very northern working class background, this was something, completely different. So she was blown away by him, and she got involved in his fantasies. So his homicidal fantasies and also his sexual fantasies and all of his BDSM, things that he got off on.
Yeah.
But there's a line, isn't there, to be crossed? When somebody says to you, hey, I'd like to try something different in bed, you might go, okay, I'm willing to hear it. But when somebody goes, do you know what? The torture of a child would... Then you go, hey, hell no.
Calling the police.
Exactly. And I think that there was a very gradual grooming of Myra Hindley, but she got on board with it. And that's what, made this Molotov cocktail. She got on board with it and she ran with it, and she got on board with it and she ran with it even after their capture and incarceration. So I don't have any feelings of sympathy for her. And when you see how she used to write about, the parents of victims, and how she used to talk about them being a thorn in her side, because of course she
thought, really?
Yeah, oh, more than that. Yeah, she was really very rude about them, particularly about Leslie Ann Downey's mother, because I know, exactly.
I stumbled across that tape on YouTube once.
Oh,
That was the darkest thing I've ever heard.
But why should that be on YouTube? Why,
You know, it's on. You know how sick it is. It's on YouTube with horror music behind it.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard that tape, and it is truly horrific. But I just think
it's the most horrific. It kept me up for days.
Yeah, but why? So again, what is it about society? This is it. We were talking about how everybody asks me about serial
put
killers.
That on YouTube with horror music behind it.
What the fuck is that about?
Oh,
this is the torture of a little girl. Why should we be listening
to that? It gives me the shivers even thinking about it.
But why did you listen to it?
Because I couldn't stop. Like, I put it on. I don't know why. I listened to it, and then I don't even know how I got there on YouTube. It just, when you're scrolling and you watch one video, then it suggests another one. And it was like 2, 3 in the morning, and I stumbled across this, and then I put it on, and I didn't watch all of it. I listened to it for about 2 minutes, but it was the darkest 2 minutes of my life. I mean, it was about 5 years ago, and it's still like my hair stood on end thinking about it. It's that. I've got a daughter as well.
Yeah, So you're not a psychopath because you're having a physiological reaction. You're feeling something in response to that. So.
Yeah, I'm definitely not a psychopath. It's crazy. It's crazy that it's just. I think the internet though, it is almost like it's a free for all, isn't it? And it's allowing people to really express some of their dark. I mean, to put that on the internet.
Do you know, I really worry, and the fact that everybody asks me about serial killers. Why do we love serial killers so much?
I don't
really,
know.
They are. Is it not the pinnacle of loserdom?
Yeah.
Not evil. I don't believe in evil, but you've got to. It's a religious concept to me. People aren't born with horns and a tail. So how do they become what they eventually turn out to be? But don't you have to be grossly inadequate to get your kicks from killing people?
Yeah.
And yet we almost give serial killers this
glamorization.
Yeah, they're like pop culture celebrities. Yeah. And what worries me is
Bundy had a fan club.
Oh, yeah. I used to get letters from women who would say to me things like...
Do you know Ted?
Well, I find Ted Bundy really sexy, and I'm thinking, well, he's kind of an average-looking bloke, but isn't being a serial killer a bit of a deal breaker? And they would say to me, I've had his teeth marks, which of course formed a big part of the evidence against him. They were taken from the bodies of his victims. I've had them tattooed on my thighs.
What the fuck?
Yeah. So what worries me is that violence, particularly violence towards women, is becoming glamorized.
Yeah.
And it's becoming fetishized. And I think that it's just kind of seeping.
Why is that?
Do you know what? There are so many different reasons, I think, for it. I think we've got these very glossy crime programs, haven't we?
Mm.
And often the stories involve real violence against women.
Yeah.
But something that I've noticed, particularly with the American ones, when you see a corpse on True Detective, this kind of thing, it's always a beautiful woman. Yeah. This woman's got no cellulite whatsoever. Yeah. She's absolutely gorgeous. She's a Victoria's Secret model or something. You would think that cellulite protects you from violent crime as a woman, which it absolutely doesn't. So you've got all of these beautiful women being killed in interesting ways. And there's a titillation aspect to that. Yeah. And I think what's happened is that I think that culturally we're getting more and more down that line. You've only got to go online and you can look up people's crime scene photographs. Mm. That really annoys me because that body, whoever he or she is, never gave you permission to view that.
Exactly.
Very intimate moment.
Exactly. Someone's died.
Exactly.
Why do you want to see that?
Yeah, and I take part in crime documentaries, but the majority of the ones that I do are for Discovery, and they actually have a no body policy, so you don't see dead bodies in the documentaries because there's a bit of respect for the victims and the victim's family. But so many documentaries now go into like really lurid detail. Yeah. And I mean, I do it because I've got a reason to do it because
it's your job.
It's my job. But this is it. You go online and it's like nothing now is too much or too far.
Yeah.
So, and I think that is worrying.
It's almost like the further you go, well, it's all about algorithm now, isn't it? The more sensational something is, the more shared it will become, the more popular it will become, the more likes, the more engagement.
But, you know, you get a desensitization to that. I mean, I've become desensitized to that. I look at crime scenes all the time, and I always have a response, a physiological response, but it's got less and less and less.
Yeah.
But I do think it's become titillation. And I think that you also have to look at what's happening in mainstream porn.
Yeah.
Violence towards women has now become mainstream in pornography, where it used to be actually quite niche.
Yeah.
So
and the availability of porn, like, it's just any kid can start watching that now.
I know, and it's such a shame. I know it used to be fantastic. You know, I'm 48, and for me, pornography was if you managed to get hold of a top shelf magazine, or you know, you found that your mum and dad had a dirty book somewhere, and you'd have a lovely snog behind the bike sheds, that kind of thing, and it was like really thrilling and exciting. Whereas literally everything's just out there now, and kids, you know, they're not able to emotionally process all of this. So
it's a lot to take in, isn't it? Really, for young kids who get hold of the mum or dad's phone and going.
Or they've got a phone of their own. Exactly, and it doesn't take much. It's just a few clicks away, and then you've got kids. I've spoken to kids. You know, I'm calling them kids around the age of 12 to 14, and they say, "Oh God, yeah, I've seen loads and loads of porn, and it's normal to strangle your partner, and it's normal to spit at your partner, and oh my God, no, I've never seen a woman with a pubic hair." You know, I think the kids these days, if they saw a woman with a hairy, you know, a lady garden would faint, because so it's skewing what is normal, and what we don't see is actual, you know, real
women
loving, real women, but real loving sex and relationships.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you released the book in August. We've
I
not
did.
even spoke about this yet, and we need to speak about this.
We need to speak about this.
So go on. So tell me about this book, and where did the idea come from?
So it's my second book.
Yeah.
So my first book was called The Dark Side of the Mind, and it's all about my career in forensic psychology, and it takes you all the way through my career. It's kind of like a whistle-stop tour.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's a memoir. It's very much about me, but it's about lots of the people that I've met as well. And I wanted to write a book that went against all of the usual true crime tropes and stereotypes and what I call crime porn.
Yeah.
So yes, you've got killers in there, but you've got other types of offenders in there, and you've got some people that aren't even offenders, but they've found themselves in maybe mental health services, and people are worried about the risk that they might pose.
Yeah.
So my second book is called What Lies Buried.
Yeah.
People think that I'm a pathologist. Yeah, I'm a psychologist. It's got nothing to do with dead bodies. Yeah. It's to do with what lies buried in people's backgrounds, in their histories, in their psyches, that causes the development of either mental health problems or criminality. So again, it's a memoir, but it's less about me and it's more about the people that I've worked with.
Right.
So there are shoplifters in there. There's a guy who has raped an elderly woman in there.
Right.
There's a girl who has been diagnosed with Munchausen's by proxy, which I think is a ridiculous label.
Is that when you're pretending to be ill all the time?
That's when you cause somebody else in your care to be ill.
Right.
So actually, she was causing her baby son to have fits, and very, very narrowly escaped killing him. So it's about really trying to meet these people in the same way that I meet them, to figure out what their behaviour's all about, but to go beyond the labels. So I'm trying to encourage people not to
give them
think
aliases in the book?
Oh yeah, everybody's heavily disguised.
Yeah.
Heavily disguised.
Yeah.
I mean, I've changed names, I've changed obviously their physical description, I've had to change the locations and the descriptions of locations. So they're all very, very true to what I see.
Yeah. So the facts remain as they are.
Oh yeah.
But the decoration essentially.
Yeah, because I don't want to get sued. And also I'm a psychologist, so my work is based on confidentiality, and I don't want to betray anybody in that way.
Well, it's why we can't talk about Charles Bronson, isn't it?
It's why we can't talk about Charles Bronson. It's why we can't talk about lots of high-profile people that I work with. Yes, because unless somebody gives me permission to talk about them, then I'm not going to do it, or I'll do it in a very disguised way.
So with this book, you've gone through some of these cases, but obviously you've changed the identities and whatnot of the people. And what would you say is like the core message of the book, or is there a core message of the book?
There is a core message. I think the core message of the first book is it's not them and us, it's just us.
Yeah.
And also, rather than asking, which is the question that people say to me all the time, what the hell is wrong with these people?
Yeah.
What we should be saying is, what has happened to these people
Yeah.
to create this behaviour?
Yeah.
And actually, what has happened to us as a society? Because these things don't happen in a vacuum. They happen in our communities.
Yeah.
And so I would say that the second book is similar to that, but it's a call really to media.
Right.
Yeah, to stop trotting out the same old stereotypes and tropes. I'm sick of seeing, headlines about psycho killers and schizophrenic murderers, and actually tell better stories that do a better job of explaining how people got to the point that they got to.
Yeah.
Because I want people to think really carefully about how they vote.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when they're putting that cross on the paper, quite often it's because a particular party has said, well, we're tough on crime and this is our policy and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But I want people to actually be aware of what goes on and in the criminal justice system, in the mental health services, so that it can actually make more informed choices.
How would you reform the criminal justice system?
Oh my God, how much time have you got? There's so many things.
Yeah.
The first thing that I would do is, I think that for minor offences, we've got to stop looking at prison as a solution. Our prisons are overcrowded.
Yeah.
Most people will go back into prison, so they're clearly not working.
Yeah.
Scandinavian countries do it so much better.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've got a much lower reoffending rate.
What do they do with petty crime in Scandinavia?
Well, the thing is, they don't incarcerate people for less than 6 months, or they incarcerate the most serious offenders, and they put far more investment into that. They treat them more humanely, which isn't, a lot of people think that that's a soft option. Yeah. But they rehabilitate them. They look at things like future employment, relationships with other people. Yeah. They focus on trauma. And they basically treat them like human beings, and they don't have these kind of misery factories, these warehouses full of people that we have. Yeah. So I think that I'd get rid of shorter prison sentences and look to more community, sentences, not letting people off the hook.
I think rehabilitation needs to be what it is, like to help someone, like, look, if someone's selling drugs, right, or if someone's chose that as a career path, that's how they chose to make their money. Now, whether that's because they have a drug problem, or B, they've not been able to earn enough, get qualified, go to university, or get qualified to get themselves a job that they want to do, or that's fulfilling them, and this is a means to an end to get quick cash, but then they then get pulled over, stopped on the street, caught with whatever, bang, you're going to jail for 2 years. Now, coming back out of that 2 years, you're still back in that same position.
Exactly, and you're back with the same people around you.
The same people, and
what's changed?
The only difference is you're now more desperate because you're 2 years older. And
you probably learn, you've learned things while you're in prison, but
made more connections.
Yeah, you've made more connections, and you've learned how to do it. Yeah, not get caught. Exactly. So, for me, I always say, because this isn't letting people off the hook, because occasionally someone will say, oh, you're one of these soft lefty types and you want to let people off. No, I don't actually. I'm actually quite harsh, to be honest. But I always say criminality is a choice, but some people have got more choices than others. Yeah. And so it's about looking at what choices people have and giving them more choices. Yeah. So choices equal opportunities. Yeah. So it's about what opportunities can we give people to build law-abiding lives. So like you were talking, employment, education, relationships with people, skills. Yeah, they're so important. Do they need drugs rehab? Do they need support if they're taking drugs themselves? All of these things should happen in prison. Yeah. but they tend not to. Or if they are happening, it's because we've got, you know, charities going in.
Yeah. It's a brush it under the carpet psychology, isn't it?
Well, it's kind of, it's a punitive psychology. It's kind of, well, these are nasty people. They've done bad things.
Yeah.
And so we need to be really, really tough on them.
Yeah.
And that's going to send a message.
Yeah.
And actually it sends them, it doesn't work.
Old-fashioned mentality, isn't it?
You know, when I first started, so back in 1996, when I went into Wakefield Prison,
Yeah.
in 1992, so a few years before, we'd had the murder of James Bulger. And both political parties had seen it as an opportunity to win votes by getting tough on crime. So we had John Major at the time saying what we need is less understanding and more condemnation. Yeah, he's talking about two 10-year-olds here. Yeah, not the most pleasant 10-year-olds, admittedly, but the 10-year-olds. And then we had the Labour government, you know, Tony Blair was saying, well, we're going to be tough on crime and tough on the causes of crime. So, you know, both political parties were wanting to show that they're going to take a tough stance because this is what wins votes.
Yeah.
But what people just don't seem to be able to wrap their heads around is that this tough stance isn't working. And when something doesn't work, we actually create more criminality. And if we create more criminality, we create more victims.
Yeah.
And I think because people think, well, I don't care about criminals, these bad people that are very different to me.
Yeah.
But I say that if you don't care about criminals, fair enough, I get that. But do you care about potential victims? Because if you care about potential victims, you should be interested in what works to turn people around.
Yeah.
And actually, you know, it's not being soft, but it is giving people the opportunities and choices that otherwise they've lacked often.
Yeah.
Often, not always. You know, I don't think everybody can be rehabilitated. You know, I'm not daft.
Yeah.
But many people can, and I've
the
seen
the
people.
opportunity should at least be there.
Yeah, it should. And what we should not be doing is actually, you know, putting people into a situation that makes them worse.
But I think someone like Myra Hindley or the Bulger killers, they can't be rehabilitated.
Well,
I mean,
one of the Bulger killers has been rehabilitated.
In what sense?
Well, one of the Bulger killers is now living out in the community under a different identity, which, you know, I don't think their identities should have been revealed. That's my personal point of view.
Yeah.
But anyway, spending lots of money on a new identity. And he is living a crime-free, law-abiding life. And he actually says, you know, my life in secure services for kids was actually so much better than my life outside beforehand, which is really sad, isn't it? And a lot of people got very angry about that because he said, you know, I realised that it actually took me
it's the Venables kid that can't stop himself, isn't it?
And he has clearly got really deep-seated problems. Has been found.
Was he not born evil?
You have to look at it. You have to look at the background of these kids. You have to look at the background of these kids, and people get very, very emotional about this case, and I can understand it.
I mean,
because what they did was so appalling.
10 years old, you know what you're doing at 10 years old.
You know right from wrong at 10 years old, but at 10 years old, you're telling me you made all great choices.
I wouldn't have killed a baby.
No, you wouldn't have killed a baby, but it was you had these two children. Who were both incredibly disturbed from incredibly dysfunctional backgrounds. And actually, the one who was less intellectually able was seen as the most vulnerable. But in actual fact, he was the one that had the background of the most severe violence and was more sadistic. And they got into this situation.
The Venables kid, he was the worst one, wasn't he?
Yeah, and they both egged each other on, and it was this kind of, you know, meeting of disturbed minds and this not wanting to back out. But you know what they did was utterly appalling. But he has then gone on to obviously incorporate that into, you know, his fantasy life. He is downloading child abuse imagery from the internet. And personally, I think he's had his chances. He should be behind bars.
They should lock him away and throw away the key. I mean, they should have capital punished. I mean, for me, like, Hindley, Brady, them two, I'll put him in firing squad.
Do you know what? I'm going to challenge you now.
Okay.
Read one of my books, just one,
I will do, yeah.
and see if you feel the same
Okay.
afterwards. It is really difficult, though. This is it, and this is the thing about being a forensic psychologist. You're constantly having this kind of set of dilemmas.
Yeah.
And, you know, quite often I have been charged with managing somebody in the community
Yeah.
who has come out of prison.
Yeah.
And, for example, they may have killed a child. And I personally
How do you deal with that?
I don't believe that they should be in the community, but it's my job to make them safe. And in actual fact, we've been able to manage them safely in the community. And then I always feel a tear. Well, you know, should these people be given a chance or not? And what I always say is,
how do you deal with speaking to them? How do you sit with a child killer and say, "Are you safe? Is everything okay? You got everything you need?"
What I think of is this, yeah? You are more than just your deeds, aren't you? You're a whole person. You're not just, you've probably done bad things in your time.
Yeah, but I mean,
there's degrees. I get that.
There's variables.
Yeah, there
I
are
mean,
degrees.
We've all made mistakes.
Yeah, but
inhumane crimes is a different
everybody, I think, is more than just their, you know, a deed. And I constantly struggle with, you know, if somebody is a murderer on one day out of however many thousands of days they've been on this planet, does that mean that that is their entire identity?
But what's been building up to that? How long
So
have they
for
been planning,
me,
fantasizing, sadicizing about it?
So for me, it's about understanding that individual story, because everybody has an individual story.
Yeah.
And understanding what has happened to them, and trying to, you know, when I say understand, I don't mean excuse, and I don't mean justify. I do mean understand.
Yeah.
And sometimes I find that I still don't like that person. Other times I find that actually I do like that person. Yeah. And I always look for, what I say is, look for the human driver behind an inhumane act.
Yeah.
Because we can identify with that to an extent. So, you know, we all need money. We all need to feel that we've got some power in life, that we're able to influence people, etc., etc. But often when you know, the people that have done the worst things, I often find have had such adversity, such trauma in their life, and it doesn't excuse it, because other people have that and they don't go on to do terrible things.
Exactly.
But it sets it in a context, and then when you're seeing that human being in context, they are a lot easier to relate to. Yeah. As I say, there's a story in What Lies Buried about a police investigation that I took part in. And it was an investigation into the rape of an elderly woman who was also blind. I know. So it's dark territory.
That's dark.
Yeah. Do you know the books? The books are not too dark, though. Right. There's a lot of humour in there, believe it or not.
No, I can imagine.
Yeah. So, but we had to interview this witness. So there was a lot of planning and preparation that went into the interviewing of her, because she wasn't going to be able to give us eyewitness testimony. Yeah, she was going to have to give us ear witness testimony, and it was going to be difficult. But, you know, we managed to get really, really good information from her, not re-traumatize her too much. And we were able to identify the man who had raped her, and he was subsequently sent to prison. Now, many years later, I was working in what you might call a halfway house for men that had come out of prison or had come out of secure services. And walk in one morning, we've got this guy, we're really concerned about him, we really need you to see him. Fine, give me the file. What has he done? Well, he's raped this elderly woman and she was blind and da-da-da-da. And I knew who it was, before he walked in the room. And immediately I started to have a lot of really angry emotions about that, because, you know, I've heard this victim's story. Yeah, and when you've worked with the victims, it then becomes far more difficult to work, you know. So before he even walked into the room, I was thinking, you shitbag. Yeah, I know what you've done. I know what you are. And I really had to have a moment with myself. And I had to step back and I had to think, right, you know, I've got to be professional here. But
that must be hard.
It is hard, but I had to think, that's what he did, all those years ago, I now have to meet him as who he is today. Yeah. I need to hear his story.
Yeah.
And actually, when he came in, he was in a really distressed state. He'd been completely traumatized by taking part in a sex offenders treatment program, believe it or not, which is meant to rehabilitate people. Yeah. But millions of pounds has been spent on the program. It's since been pulled because it was found to be making people worse. Yeah. And he was in a really bad state. And I had to just think to myself, right, I've got a human being in front of me who needs my help. So I always call it the difference between empathy and compassion. Yeah. I'm not there to feel empathy for somebody. I'm not there to feel what they feel and feel sorry for them. Yeah. I'm not there to be angry with somebody, but I'm going to try and be compassionate. So I'm going to try and balance your rights with everybody else's rights. Yeah. But it's difficult. Sometimes
and you've got to be professional as well.
Yeah, you've got to be professional, and you've got to be very in tune with your own feelings. Yeah. And you've got to be able to put them to one side, and then you take them, because all psychologists have supervision. Yeah. Yeah. And then you take them to supervision. And you say, God, I was feeling this, and I was really angry, and I came home, and I was, and you talk about it, and you just have to process your own emotions constantly.
Right. Wow.
It gets too much. There's a moment in my first book, The Dark Side of the Mind, and I actually called it The Dark Side of the Mind in relation to myself, not in relation to any of my clients, where I had worked with far too many sex offenders. Yeah. I'd worked with too many cases involving child abuse. And I'd gone to see the trial of Mark Bridger, who killed April Jones. And all I can say is that I was really fucking angry. Yeah. And I had to really appreciate that I'd got to my limit at that point, and I had to take a bit of a step back. And I went and worked with a different group of clients for a while. Yeah. Because it does get to you, you know. You know what they say, if you stare too long into the abyss, it will stare back into you. Yeah, that's true.
Kerry, thank you so much. It's been amazing.
Thank you for having me.
No, it's a pleasure.
Anytime.